Well, hello, and thanks very much for joining us for this Campaign 2020 special. I'm John Keller, political analyst for CBSN Boston and WBZ-TV. This November, along with voting for the presidency, the Senate, and other local races, voters will decide two ballot questions here in Massachusetts. Right now, we're taking a deep dive into question 2 concerning ranked choice voting. Here's a brief summary. A yes vote would give voters in most elections the option to rank candidates in order of preference instead of selecting just one candidate. If no candidate wins 50% support, the candidate or candidates who received the fewest first-place votes would be eliminated, and in the next round, each vote for an eliminated candidate would instead be counted toward their next highest-ranked candidate on that voter's ballot. This process would continue until one candidate receives a majority. Now, a no vote would make no change in how votes are counted, keeps the status quo. All right, joining us to debate question 2 and give us all a better grasp of what it would mean for future elections, we're pleased to welcome Anthony Amore, a Republican strategist and 2018 candidate for Secretary of State. Mr. Amore is representing the No on 2 side. And Evan Falchuk, former candidate for governor, CEO of Village Plan, and board chair of the Yes on 2 campaign. Anthony, Evan, thanks to both of you for being with us today. So let's begin our debate.
Thank you.
Evan, let's start with you. Why do we need ranked choice voting?
Well, I'm excited to be here talking about ranked choice voting because it's a needed upgrade to our democracy. At a time when we see so much division, we need solutions that bring us together with consensus, that make it possible for voters to have more choices, to never feel like they're wasting their vote, and never to have to feel like they have to hold their nose and vote for the lesser of two evils. So ranked choice voting brings a lot of great benefits to the voters of Massachusetts, and it's why we're urging people to vote yes on question 2.
All right, Anthony, why shouldn't we go there?
Well, we're urging people to vote no on question 2 because we've looked at the voting system, ranked choice voting, and found it to be overly complex and difficult, the ballots to be complicated, and in places where ranked choice voting has been implemented, the findings are that you see an increase in ballots that are so-called spoiled ballots, which are discarded. You see that the goals of ranked choice voting are not met. In other words, the aim of ending a duopoly of Democrats and Republicans has just never been achieved. And you also find that where ranked choice voting has been implemented, it seems to have a impact on communities that have achieved lesser education. In other words, places where maybe people have less college degrees. It impacts older voters who have more difficulty understanding the ballot. And it also leaves people without having the benefit of the one vote, one person, one vote system that we're all used to. So in short, we're taking a very simple system that everyone's been used to for centuries and replacing it with a very complicated system which disenfranchises people. Okay,
so that's a good overview by both of you. Let's try to pick up on some of the issues you both raised and hash them out one by one. The question of restoring majority rule. Evan, let's go back to you. How does ranked choice voting guarantee that, or does it?
It does. I mean, it's set up to make sure that the winner of every election has majority support. And it's actually a simple way of doing it. Now, we just saw in the 4th congressional district here in Massachusetts that there was a 9-person race for the Democratic primary, and the winner ended up with 22% of the vote, which means that 78% of people voted for somebody else. So that's not fair. In a ranked choice system, we would have been able to tally all the votes and found a way to make sure that the winner had more than 50%. Now, it's not controversial because not only did Jake Auchincloss, who won the election, endorse ranked choice voting, but so has every other candidate in that race. And it reflects the broad base of support that ranked choice voting has all across Massachusetts.
Now, there are a few places, Maine, some local communities in the Pacific Northwest, Australia for its parliament that have had ranked choice voting in place now for varying amounts of time. Anthony, what do we learn from their experience with regard to this question of getting majority rule?
I'm glad you asked. Well, in fact, what you learn is that when a true study of all the votes cast that day and all the votes that are exhausted, in other words, people who didn't vote all the way down the line, they only chose one or two candidates, oftentimes the winner of the election, the so-called winner, does not get 50% of the vote. The Maine Policy Institute looked at over 90 elections, and they found that in 61% of those elections, less than 50% of the people voted at all for the person who wound up winning. In an election, and you mentioned the Pacific Coast, in an election in San Francisco for their Board of County Commissioners, one analysis showed that the eventual winner, frankly, only got 25% of the vote. And this is because exhausted ballots and spoiled ballots are not counted in the denominator when this 50% tally is reached. So it does not always accomplish the goal. In fact, more often than not, the majority does not go to the winner.
Evan, rebuttal?
Well, it's not true. Using the way that Anthony is measuring this, in that same 4th congressional district race, 78% of people's votes weren't counted. So ranked choice actually helps increase voter participation. But more to the point, the endorsers of ranked choice voting include people like Deval Patrick, Governor Bill Weld, Senator Warren, Attorney General Maura Healey, people from all across the political spectrum, good government groups who care about voting rights and care about making sure that every vote is counted. They support this. And I think that's what you need to know about why this is such an important reform.
Response, Anthony?
Sure. Evan's right. The people he mentioned are supporting it. Note that none of them have ranked choice voting in their states. When you look at California, where they had it, Jerry Brown called it complexifying and vetoed it. Gavin Newsom had it in San Francisco, and he has also vetoed it, as has the New York State NAACP and Jesse Jackson. So it's a bipartisan rejection of this program in places where they had it and saw that it does not work.
Now, one question point you guys have raised that I hear a lot of people raising, just as I move around, which is, fatigue or cynicism about the two-party system. And Evan, I'm going to start with you here. You're arguing that ranked choice voting will help independent and third-party candidates become more of a factor in these elections. Go ahead, make that case. How does it make that happen?
Well, as a former independent candidate myself, one of the biggest challenges that I faced is that you'd meet voters and they'd say, it would be great to have an independent candidate in this race, but you can't win, so I'm not going to vote for you because it's a waste. And that is the fundamental problem that third-party and independent candidates face more than anything. It's leaving voters saying, I need to pick between the lesser of two evils because I can't vote for the person that I really like. Ranked choice voting completely levels the playing field. It makes it so that you can always vote for the person you like without worrying that you're wasting your vote, without worrying that you're going to swing the election and that someone's going to be called a spoiler. So if you think about as an independent or third-party candidate, what makes running for office challenging, ranked choice voting fixes, and it's why the Green Party has endorsed this, and the Libertarian Party has also endorsed question 2.
Well, what about that, Anthony? And if you disagree with that, do you have an alternative idea about how the stranglehold of the two parties can be eased, if not outright broken?
Well, let me first say that I understand that desire. I do believe in third parties, and I think that it would be great if other parties had more of a say. However, in no place where ranked choice voting in the United States has been implemented has that actually happened. There have been no third parties that have risen to any significant power. There have been no third-party candidates who have achieved anything. What happens is their votes get redistributed to the first or second place finisher, which is usually a Republican or a Democrat. I think we have much bigger issues about how our elections work. I mean, in Massachusetts, the state law says that the incumbent is listed first on the ballot, and next to their name it says incumbent. I think there are issues about how people have money in their war chest when they run uncontested and accumulate hundreds of thousands of dollars, stunting anybody's ability to run a true grassroots campaign against them. However, changing our election system to a very confusing ballot is not the answer to fixing any of these problems.
Evan, go ahead and rebut if you'd like.
Yeah, it's a simple fix, and it's an easy thing to do because voters rank things all the time, whether it's going to Dunkin' Donuts and deciding I want one donut versus another one. It's the one area where we don't get to rank things is in politics. Look, third parties have a lot of work to do to get themselves onto the map. Independent candidates face a lot of challenges, but ranked choice voting is a reform that we can make today, now, that will help make things better. And I think we know there's a lot of work to be done to improve our democracy. This is one piece of that puzzle, and it's an important reform that these great reformers and political leaders support.
Equal time, Anthony.
Well, I like Evan's analogy about Dunkin' Donuts because it proves my point. When you go to Dunkin' Donuts, you know what those things on the menu are. When you go into a ballot booth and you have 9 candidates in front of you, like in the 4th Congressional District, you don't always know the fine differences between them, or maybe have even heard of them. In 2018, when Jeff Deal ran against Elizabeth Warren in a one-on-one race, a week before the election, 36% of registered voters said they had never heard of Jeff Deal. And now we're going to ask people to go in and rank or not rank 5 or 6 or 7 people. They don't know the candidates, and not because they're not sophisticated, it's because it's time consuming to study all the fine intricacies of every candidate's race. That's why we are all for the system used in the city of Boston, where the top 2 finishers go against each other head to head in a separate runoff election.
Well, now I want to jump in here and have you guys go back and forth a little bit on this question of voter exhaustion. Voters who, when confronted with a ballot like in the 4th CD, 9 choices in the Democratic primary, don't rank all 9. These, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you guys will, this could lead to those ballots being tossed out altogether. How is that fair? Why don't you start, Anthony?
Well, it's not fair. What happens is, John, if you in an election vote for one person, you decide to just do a bullet vote, and I vote for 3 or 4 and I game it correctly, if it goes to a second round, you're out. It's as if you didn't vote in the election. And worse off, you're not counted in that final tally, which is why most of the time you don't get 50% of the vote when you win. So that's one of the reasons that we're concerned about exhausted ballots. In Australia, it was a problem. So the Australian system requires everyone to rank every candidate, and imagine the problems associated with that.
Rebuttal, Evan.
It's a problem that exists in our current system. So to use that 4th Congressional District race, if you did not vote for Jake Auchincloss, your vote was, to use the definition we're using, not counted. This, in ranked choice voting, that doesn't happen, and anywhere near the numbers. So ranked choice voting isn't a panacea, and none of us have ever said that it is, but it makes these kinds of problems so much better. And as I've said, it's something we can do now, today, to improve our voting system. And one other comment, voters are smart, and they are informed, and they are sophisticated, and they can rank candidates. They can tell the difference between people, and they want the opportunity to do so.
Now, Evan, people on... I'm sorry, go ahead, Anthony. Go ahead.
I was going to say no, but when you talk to voters, they admit themselves they don't know all the candidates on the ballot. It's no insult to say that you don't know everything about 9 different candidates. And secondly, with exhausted ballots, it's not the same, Evan, as when you voted for someone other than Jake Auchincloss, because in a ranked choice system, only the people who voted for the candidates who were knocked off and have their votes redistributed voted twice in that election. If you voted for the person who finished 3rd or 4th and it doesn't get to you, then you only voted once that day. So some people vote more than once, others only vote once, and it's an unfair system for that reason.
Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, it's not true. I mean, you get one vote, and there have been all kinds of allegations like this made up in Maine, where there have been challenges to the constitutionality of this. And the courts have repeatedly said this is not a problem under our federal constitution. This is not more than one person, one vote. This is a simple fix that upgrades our system and makes it possible for voters to have more choice and a greater voice. So it is.
But it is absolutely
the endorsers that we have. The endorsers that we have all
sentence.
across the political spectrum. Me?
Yeah, go ahead, Evan. Finish your thought, and then we'll let you in.
Yeah,
Anthony.
I mean, the thousands of volunteers, almost 200,000 people who signed to improve our democracy in this way. This is something that voters deserve and want, and they have a right to.
All right, Anthony, briefly, go ahead.
Forgive me for interrupting, Evan, too. I didn't mean to. It is absolutely true that some people get more than one vote. There's no disputing this. This is a mathematical fact, and it's the way the system works. It's first past the post after the first round. So some people have voted once. Some people have had 2 or 3 of their votes counted. That's the way ballot exhaustion works. It's not up for dispute. That's how it works.
Well, you're defining the ranking. If there's 5 candidates, I rank them all 5. You're defining that as 5 different votes. Is that what I understand you to say?
No.
Okay.
If there are 5 candidates and the 5th one is, and let's suppose there are 5 candidates and I only voted for 1 and you voted for all 5. The 5th person gets knocked off if someone hasn't reached 50%. Because you voted for that 5th finisher, your second place vote will be redistributed. If that's enough to win the race, I have voted once, you have voted twice.
All right, I'll tell you what, let's move on and talk a little bit about the cost of all this. In the state voting guide, it says that if ranked choice voting is approved, it will require implementation costs. Evan, let's turn this over to you since you're the advocate for it. How much is it going to cost?
Not much. We've been working with Secretary Galvin's office, and Secretary Galvin has endorsed ranked choice voting, as well with clerks across the Commonwealth. And there may be some software upgrades that are needed, but our voting machines generally are capable of doing this. The comparison I'll use is Maine, where they ran a ranked choice election in the 2018 congressional race up there, and it costs them a net additional cost of about $120,000. So it's a limited expense. And I've got a lot of confidence in Secretary Galvin and the clerks to implement ranked choice voting effectively in 2022.
All right, go ahead, Anthony.
Well, 2 things. First, it's interesting to hear Secretary Galvin endorse this when he has said in the past that he thinks people shouldn't vote for a third-party candidate. But that aside, the cost that you cited in Maine, Evan, 2 things. First of all, the number of votes cast in Maine are drastically different. And though it might have cost around that much, it took almost 8 days to get a final tally on that election. So for 8 days, we didn't even know who won because it's so complicated. Fortunately, it didn't go to a hand recount, which would have been tremendously complicated to complete and time-consuming. So there's a lot of factors that go into this, except beyond just dollars and cents.
All right, if you just joined us, by the way, to our viewers, you're watching a debate on question 2 on your November ballot, whether or not Massachusetts should turn to a ranked choice voting system. Evan, I'm sorry, I heard you trying to jump in there. Go ahead if you have more to say on that.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that the reason it took those extra days in Maine is because the Secretary of State scheduled the count for 8 days later. So it's, again, ranked choice voting is a simple fix, and it is not more complicated to count than any other way of counting.
Well,
it's a computerized system for scanning the ballots, and counting them takes 30 seconds.
Well, let me stay with you because people on your... Go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Anthony.
Thank you, John. It was scheduled for 8 days later because all of the ballots had to be transported to a central computer. It wasn't just a whim that the Secretary of State picked 8 days. They had to be transported from around Maine to a central computer where they could be counted. That's why it took 8 days.
All right, let's move on, gentlemen, because the clock is ticking here. And I wanted to start with you on this one, Evan, because people on your side say ranked choice voting will discourage negative campaigning because candidates will have to work to secure the affinity of voters who might make them their second or third place choice, and that could pay off big time as the process unfolds. What's the evidence for that negative campaigning declines in a ranked choice voting system?
There have been a few studies looking at ranked choice elections in different parts of the United States that show that voters are reporting a decrease in negative campaigning. We even saw up in Maine where they had a governor's race where two of the candidates shot ads together, cross-endorsing each other. So it changes the incentives in a race. And I can tell you as a candidate, if I was out there knocking on doors and there was a sign for another candidate in front of a house, I wouldn't knock on that door. In a ranked choice election, I would. And the conversation I would have would be, where can we agree on something so that I could hopefully convince that voter to pick me as their second choice? That would be a refreshing change from the politics of division that we see today.
Rebuttal, Anthony?
Sure. Two things. First of all, with more candidates, there are places where they've seen more negative campaigning. That seems to be something you'd think would be obvious. But secondly, think about the example Evan just gave with two candidates scheming together to try to win votes against another candidate. So with ranked choice voting, you introduce this gamesmanship. And we're seeing it now in the Senate race in Maine with Susan Collins, where her opponent is working with a third candidate to try to explain to that person's voters how they should vote so that Susan Collins doesn't win. So it brings into the system gamesmanship that really shouldn't be part of an election.
Go ahead, response?
Yeah, the gamesmanship actually is what exists today, where we see things like Kanye West being put on the ballot in Wisconsin to try to be a spoiler. The whole spoiler effect, the whole concept of wasted votes, the whole concept of splitting the vote with somebody disappears in ranked choice voting. It doesn't exist. So it helps alleviate that problem. It does not create new ones.
I'll give you a quick final word on this, Anthony, and then I want to move on.
Thank you. The Kanye West example is a good one, Evan, because what would happen in that race if there was ranked choice voting is people who voted for him, who he's not a serious candidate, would be the first ones who have their second choice redistributed. So the people who voted for the least palatable candidate wind up being the people who are most likely to have a second vote cast that could end the election right there. So it's not a good reason for that.
Let me clarify something, gentlemen, that I'm confused about here. If question 2 passes, would it apply to presidential primaries 4 years from now?
Well, the question starts in 2022, and it would not. Yeah, it would not.
It would not apply to president, just to state races and local races?
State legislative races, the state constitutional offices,
Right.
and the U.S. congressional races.
And not like the Boston City Council race where you vote for, say, 4 at-large councilors. That wouldn't apply there, correct?
Correct.
All right, look, let me start with you on this one, Anthony. One of the goals cited by the advocates for this is that ranked choice voting would reduce the role of money in politics. The endless TV ad wars where super PACs come in and dump millions of dollars on these attack ads. Wouldn't that be a good thing?
There's no evidence that that happens, John. A lot of what ranked choice voting preaches sound like good things, but they just don't happen. In fact, the more candidates you have, the more ads and the more money you're going to see. So it doesn't take money out of the system. If anything, it will increase it.
Go ahead, Evan.
We have a problem with money in politics in America, and part of what we need to do is get rid of Citizens United. Ranked choice voting is part of the solution to this. If we can elect people who have the best ideas, not necessarily the most money behind them, we will have an improved system. If we can level the playing field so that the candidate who has a super PAC going for them has an equal chance of winning to someone who does not, that will improve the system. But there's no question we've got work to do on getting money out of politics, and this is one piece of that long journey.
Speaking of money, you both mentioned the Maine congressional race 2 years ago, where their first go-round with ranked choice voting. And in that race, the incumbent, Bruce Pelequin, won a narrow victory initially, but didn't get the 50%. And his Democratic challenger, Jared Golden, triumphed in the ranked choice voting process. Pelequin went to court and sued. Is this opening the door to endless lawsuits? Anthony, why don't you start? Yeah,
2 things there. First of all, notice that in that Pelequin campaign, the third party candidate didn't rise in some great way, didn't get some extra votes, didn't emerge. No, those votes just were redistributed, and the second place finisher is sitting in Congress today. And that's just not a good thing. Secondly, I think the lawsuit that you'll see that's the most significant will be the constitutionality of ranked choice voting. And I'm not an attorney, so I don't want to get into the weeds on it, but essentially the state constitution does say that the person with the most votes, not the majority of the votes, is the winner. So I would defer to constitutional lawyers on this, but that's where I think legal challenges might emerge.
Equal time, Evan.
Yeah, it is constitutional, and we've actually worked with expert lawyers on this issue, both from a federal perspective and a state perspective. And by the way, the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts back in 1941 said that ranked choice voting was consistent with our state constitution. So look, people are going to do what they're going to do to try to push back on things, but the voters want this. And the thousands of volunteers across the Commonwealth and nearly 200,000 signatures we collected reflect the desire of voters to have the right to rank their choices.
All right, gentlemen, we're down to our last. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Anthony.
I was going to say, let's not overstate the 200,000 signatures. I mean, that's not an overwhelming amount of people in Massachusetts by any measure. So that's not indicative of the fact that the voters want this.
Go ahead, Evan.
Well, I mean, I'll speak up for those thousands of volunteers who collected those signatures, including the first ever electronic signature drive done during the pandemic this year. We've got a group of people that are really believers in making our democracy better, and they're working hard every day to win everybody's vote.
All right, gentlemen, we're down to our last couple of minutes here. Why don't you each take about a minute to sum up give the voters your elevator pitch. Let's start with the advocate for a yes vote on ballot question 2, Evan Falchuk.
Yeah, this November is the culmination of years of work by dedicated volunteers all across Massachusetts to implement ranked choice voting. We want to make our democracy better. We want to make it so that you never have to vote for the lesser of two evils. We want to make it so you have more choice and a greater voice. The endorsers we have, such as Governor Deval Patrick and Governor Bill Weld, Senator Warren, Attorney General Healy, folks all across the political spectrum, great organizations like Common Cause, Mass Vote, and others who believe in making our democracy better. We want you to always vote your hopes and not your fears. And that's why we ask you to vote yes on question 2.
Evan, thank you. And a final word from Anthony Amore, advocating for a no vote on question 2. Anthony.
Thank you. Well, ever since man has been conducting elections, the key has been simplicity and ease of use. And ranked choice voting will change that forever in Massachusetts. Voting against ranked choice voting will be the most important vote you cast this November. It's important that we ensure that our system is accessible to all. Now, our side has a grassroots effort. We're not funded. The yes side is funded primarily, over 80% of its funding comes from out of state. They have well over $5 million. We have nothing close to that. We're being outspent 2,000 to 1 for every dollar. But our grassroots effort is based on people, talking to people, and explaining to them that our system is fine the way it is, and that changing it to an overly complicated system, something Jerry Brown called complexifying, is something that we don't need in Massachusetts. Don't change our ballots to something that is hard for everyone to understand.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both very much for your time. You can, of course, go to our website, cbsboston.com, to find more resources, links to the websites for both these sides. And thank you to our viewers for tuning into this special Campaign 2020 event. We hope it was an informative debate and that, of course, you go to the polls and make your voice heard. Now, mail-in voting is already underway. Early in-person voting starts October 17th and runs through the 30th. Check with your city or town for times and locations. And then, of course, Tuesday, November 3rd is Election Day. Polls open up at 7 a.m. generally across the state, and they all close at 8 p.m. From the ballot questions to the race for president and everything in between, we hope you'll join us for live election night coverage right here on CBSN Boston, TV 38, WBZ-TV, and online at cbsboston.com. For all of us, I'm John Keller. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on election night.